Welcome on a cold and rainy opening day of the baseball season, I meant, not of the IOP. It is a real pleasure to welcome to our campus former President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency John Mahama. One of the great pleasures I had when I was working for President Obama was to travel with him in 2009 to Ghana, and it was a stirring experience to be there. So I'm eager to hear the President's remarks. As many of you know, the IOP hosts an ongoing series of discussions that seek to elevate and expand the public conversation and cultivate the next generation of political leaders. And to that end, we've got a series of events coming up this week. Tomorrow, BuzzFeed's Ben Smith, an IOP fellow and former senior advisor to President Obama, Shayla Murray, will talk about how the White House interacts with the press, which seems like a topical thing to discuss, or doesn't interact with the press. On Wednesday, former Homeland Security Advisor Lisa Monaco and CNN's chief national security correspondent Jim Sciutto will explore the greatest challenges facing America's security and how the Trump administration is managing them. And you can find out more about all our upcoming events at politics.uchicago.edu. At the end of the President's remarks, we'll open the floor to take questions from the audience. There'll be a microphone right there, so line up in the center aisle. We will prioritize the questions of students. The first three questions will go to students. I also, as always, want to thank the International House for their partnership on this program and for their great continued support of the IOP. Please silence your phones. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that in addition to the great events that we have spectacular fellows this quarter. We always have great fellows, but I think this quarter's class is as distinguished as any that we've had. We have former Governor Jennifer Granholm with us tonight. Give her a hand. Former Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken. Judge Najla Ayubi from Afghanistan. I don't know if, is that the three? Yes. And then also, I mentioned Shayla Murray, who was a senior advisor to President Obama. Former Congressman Bob Dole from the northern suburbs here is a fellow this quarter. Steve Greenhouse, who was for 3 decades correspondent for the New York Times and their expert on labor issues. Alfredo Corchado, who is a journalist and one of the great experts on the politics of the border and on the drug wars. So it's going to be a great and stimulating quarter for our students with our fellows, and we're so grateful to them for being here. And with that, I want to make formal introductions of our speaker. I want to introduce Richard Omonivi-Shovoola. Is that right? Omonivi-Shovoola. I almost got that. Richard is a second year in the college majoring in political science. So please join me in welcoming Richard to the podium.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama was born in the Ghanaian town of Damongo. In his youth, he was exposed to military coups and saw his own father imprisoned for more than a year. He would go on to conduct his undergraduate studies in history and communications at the University of Ghana and obtain a graduate diploma of social psychology in Moscow. His career developments include his becoming a historian, a writer, and communications expert. His Excellency would go on to serve as a member of the Ghanaian Parliament for 12 years, where he engaged with such policy areas as transportation, industry, energy, and communications. In January 2009, he was elected the Vice President of Ghana, also having served as the chairman of the National Economic Management Team and the Armed Forces Council of Ghana. Upon the passing of his predecessor, John Atta Mills, he became the 4th President of Ghana. As president, His Excellency was the first Ghanaian head of state to have been born after Ghana's declaration of independence. His book, My First Coup d'etat, offers an insightful discussion of the lost decades of Africa during the tumultuous post-independence period of the 1970s and 1980s. With a poised and magnanimous disposition, His Excellency continues to be a distinguished African political thinker, writer, father, and motorbike enthusiast. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama.
Thank you very much, Richard. Let me thank David and all the staff of the Institute of Politics International House for having me here today. I'm told I'll make a few remarks, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A session. I was told to look to my left, and there's a TV screen showing the time. Presidents are normally not used to speaking according to time, but I'll do my best. I was telling the one who mic'd me and the timekeeper that there's something we do in the United Nations when we speak at the General Assembly. At the podium, when you are led to the podium, there are 3 lights just on top of the podium, and there's a green, a yellow, and a red. When you start speaking, it's green, and then when you have 5 minutes to wind up, it turns yellow, and at the end of your speaking time, it turns red. And so a trick that I was taught quite early enough was, as soon as you get to the podium, you take your handkerchief and you cover the 3 lights. Once you don't see the lights, you just keep talking. But of course, there are other presidents and heads of states who, even if they don't cover the lights, they just continue talking. I mean, Fidel Castro is reputed to have spoken the longest, exceeding an hour or more at the United Nations. But thank you very much. I'm just going to make a few remarks about Africa in the context of a historian and also a leader, a president who has just lost election. I noticed that you're able to speak with less inhibition when you are out of office than when you're in office. You can put away a bit of the diplomacy, and so I hope I'll make a few remarks that open up, your understanding of the African continent some more. Africa has suffered from a negative narrative for a very long time, and especially in the West, if people, have a perception of Africa, it is shaped based on conflict, famine, and if there's anything positive, then it's about safari, elephants, lions, and stuff like that. But post-independence, Africa has gone through several periods, and I'll just, try and put it in context. We had the liberation period, and my country, Ghana, was the first to achieve independence from colonial rule, British colonial rule. And afterwards, Ghana became the headquarters for spearheading the fight against colonialism. And so many of the freedom fighters who eventually led their countries to independence, found refuge in Ghana. Many of them carried Ghanaian diplomatic passports to grant them immunity, from persecution in other parts of the world. And so eventually, Africa got liberated. And then we had the post-independence governments. Most of the leaders who led the liberation struggle converted into the presidents and heads of state of their country. It is one thing, I've said it's one thing being a freedom fighter, and it's another thing governing, a country properly. And so some of them might not have had the skills, to translate from freedom fighter to governance, but that was what it was at the time. Most of them were left of center because of the peculiar circumstances in which the liberation struggle was fought. The United Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR at the time, was a major champion of many of the liberation movements in Africa and contributed both financially and in terms of weapons and arms, especially to organizations like the ANC in the fight against apartheid. And so post-independence, the economic model that naturally most of these independent African countries adopted was a left-of-center socialist model. And it was based on state-run enterprises. My country was a typical example. Everything was run by the state. And so we had bakeries that were run by the state. State Transport Corporation provided transport if you wanted to travel from one part of the country. Ghana National Trading Corporation sold from washing soap to candies and ice creams and everything, toffees. You had State Insurance Company. You had Gihok Distilleries. If you wanted to have a cognac, it was blended by the state's distillery. I mean, everything was state-owned. And so the private sector and market, participation of the market was not actually encouraged. And so that was one aspect of, post-independence Africa. And then it swung to the other end. From about the 80s to the 90s, again championed by my country, Ghana, we started structural adjustment programs and economic recovery. And international financial institutions, started to work with us to try and bring the economics back onto a path of growth. And so we went to the other extreme. Subsidies were taken away, and the market was made to perform, better. And so the state withdrew from a lot of businesses. Enterprises that belonged to the state were sold to the private sector. And so there was more privatization and more of the market place in our economies. Now, what this did was that it created a new class of poor people because in operating, in carrying out market reforms, not everybody is able to compete. And so we had a new class of vulnerable people. Subsidies were withdrawn from agriculture, and so many medium to large-scale farms collapsed, and it was left with peasant and subsistence agriculture. Now, in this period, if you compare the two, it meant that you couldn't have absolutely state-run enterprises, dictating, and at the same time, you couldn't have just the market dictating relations between the various classes of society. And so we came to the realization that, yes, use the market in order that you can stimulate economic growth, but at the same time, let the state intervene so that the fruits of that growth are shared equally across the class strata. And so currently we have a mixed economy that, makes a response to the market, but at the same time, together with the international financial institutions, they also have gone through a long learning curve. They accept that we must have social protection policies that cushion the poor and vulnerable who lose out and do not benefit from growth. And so in Ghana, we have several social protection policies that are very helpful. One is the national, and I know that's topical here too, the National Health Insurance Scheme. Apparently, even in the developed countries, you've not got it completely right yet. So maybe we have a thing or two to teach you. But the National Health Insurance Scheme is our number one, social protection policy. We all pay a premium, a little premium, and then we take 2.5% of social security contributions by workers, and then we have a value-added tax of another 2.5%. And all this goes into the fund to fund the National Health Insurance. We have the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty, where we've mapped out the 150,000 poorest households in Ghana. And we give direct cash grants to these households so that they're able to send the children to school, they're able to register on the health insurance and give good care to the children in the event that they are sick. And they're able to also invest in small enterprises to be able to raise an income for the family. There are several other, social protection policies. We have a school feeding policy that gives 1.5 of the poorest children in our country one hot meal a day when they go to school. And it has helped to improve the nutritional status of the children. But aside from that, it encourages the parents to send the children to school because at least they will eat one meal in school a day. And so if Ghana has some of the highest enrollment in primary education or basic education, then it is partly due to this policy. We have about 97, 98% school enrollment. And we also have gender parity, as many girls are going to school as our boys. And so this is a good thing, and that's what's happening. Many people have asked me, that is after the Arab Spring started, as a leader, several people asked me, when is the African Spring going to take place? And I tell them, it has taken place. Just that it didn't take place in a cataclysmic manner. It has taken place over time. Post-independence, I like to say that Ghana led the liberation struggle. We are pioneers in many things. We pioneered the African liberation struggle. And then we turned again and pioneered coup d'etats, dispatching our first president. And then other African countries followed suit, dispatched their duly elected presidents and replaced them with military dictators. So Ghana saw its fair share of military dictatorship, over the years. And then again, we pioneered the return to constitutional democracy when in 1992 we adopted a new constitution, held elections, and we have never looked back since then. Since then, across the whole continent, if you look at most African countries, there is democratic consolidation. Elections are being held. And in some countries, power is shifting from one to the other. Of course, there are countries where there's one dominant party, but still people have the opportunity to cast a vote to be able to say if they favor the policies of the party or not. And depending on, the percentage even the dominant party gets, they're able to tell that there's some satisfaction with some of the policies they are having. And even where still we don't have democracy right, even those rulers are having elections and they're tuning down the percentage of the votes they got in the past. I mean, you could hear a leader gets 99.7% of the votes, total votes cast. And people say, oh, that's a sham election. So the next election he has, he says, oh no, can you lower the percentage a bit? And so it's tuned down to about 88%. He says, so now you see, 88% voted for me. The others voted against me. And so at least peer pressure, the new media, civil society organizations, religious leaders and everybody are, influencing the opening up of the democratic space in Africa. Ghana is often called the beacon of democracy because we've held 7 elections since 1992, and power has shifted multiple times. With the recent election that I lost, power has shifted from my party, the National Democratic Congress, to the New Patriotic Party. And so that's happening. Africa is beginning to reap what I call the democratic dividend because everything else is built on peace and stability. Everything else is built on peace and stability. And the only way you can ensure peace and stability is if people are able to participate in the way they are governed, if people have a say in the way they are governed. And so opening the democratic space is the first positive step that Africa needs to take and consolidate that democracy in order that we can build all the other positives on top of democratic consolidation. And so since 1992, Ghana's economy has grown positively. Before that, in many cases, the economy used to contract. But on the average, since 1992, we've grown at 6%. We recognize that we need to accelerate economic growth in order that we can keep at pace with the changing demographic, that is the growing population. But I think that Ghana is on the right track. I think many African countries are on the right track. Cote d'Ivoire last year grew at 9%, which is fantastic. There are many other countries growing at a neck-break speed. Indeed, a few years ago, among the top 10 fastest growing countries in the world, 6 of them were in Africa. And so it shows that something positive is happening on the continent. And it's not just the famine and the conflict in a few places. Indeed, some of those conflicts are actually senseless. And I speak particularly of South Sudan. It's the youngest country in the world. It was birthed with a lot of goodwill. Everybody, had best wishes for South Sudan's progress. And the conflict that is taking place there, because of the ego of 2 leaders, it's just unimaginable. I said in jest in Harvard that maybe we just have to send some commandos in and kidnap both of them and take them out of the country and let the country have some peace, But of course, I think the solutions need a little more patience, and we need to continue to intervene to see how we can change things. After I lost the election, I was quickly bundled off and added to a mediation team to go to Gambia, because the president there, after the 1st December elections, had called and congratulated his opponent who had won the elections. And then a week after he had congratulated him, he recanted his concession and said, he wanted a rerun of the election. It was a very dicey situation. And I joined 3 other heads of state to go and see how we could resolve it. And like I said in my last lecture, I'm sure that I was added to the team as a good example to him. I had also lost an election, and so if he saw me, he would realize that, it was not him alone, and others who had lost an election, and losing an election is not the end of the world, And so we spoke with him, and I knew that's why I was added, so I did my pitch. I said, we could do good things together as ex-presidents and all that. Of course, he didn't agree with me. And so eventually, ECOWAS had to use a carrot and stick approach. We did 2 mediation missions. They were successful. At least we spoke to the opposition. We spoke to him, even though he didn't accept to let go power. We reported back to ECOWAS, and then ECOWAS sent in a multinational force with the intention of showing that ECOWAS was determined to go the full hog if he didn't hand over power. And so the force was stationed just outside Banjul, which is the capital. And then a new mediation team of 2 people, President Condé and President Condé of Guinea and President Aziz of Mauritania, were sent to do the final negotiation. And realizing the determination of ECOWAS to ensure that the will of the Gambian people was upheld, he eventually agreed and handed over power and left the country. And so the new government is settling in, and they are doing the things that are necessary to heal the nation. I believe they'll set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And also last week, we were all very happy when they announced that there's nobody detained in a Gambian prison for political reasons. They freed all political prisoners, and so that's a positive thing. Africa has challenges, and one of the challenges I'll mention is both a positive, that is if we take advantage of it, or it could be a serious ticking time bomb if we're not able to take advantage of it. And that is Africa's population growth rate. We currently are estimated at 1.2 billion people on the continent. And even though birth rates and fertility rates are falling, population like a train does not break at once. It takes a long distance before it comes to a stop. And so Africa's population is slowing, it's increasing, but it's not slowing as fast as it should. And so it's believed that in the next few decades, we would have 2 billion people on the continent. How we are able to guarantee food security for 2 billion people how we're able to prevent destruction of the environment by the sheer numbers on the continent. You have people, if people continue to live in poverty, it means they're going to continue to use fuel as cooking, wood as cooking fuel. And so what will be the effect on the environment? What is going to be the issue with availability of fresh water? These are all things that we need to look at. And to compound the demographic issue, you also have the issue of climate change. And let nobody tell you different. Climate change is real. We're living it in Africa. Climate change is real. The days of denial are over. We're seeing the clear signs of climate change. The Arctic ice is melting. What else do you need to convince you? Polar bears are stranded on, floating floes. The rainfall pattern in West Africa is reducing. West Africa was known for thunderstorms, and we had huge amounts of millimeters of rainfall. Today, that rainfall is reducing. And there are strange things happening in the world. 2 weeks ago, was traveling home, and I went through the UAE, through Dubai, on Emirates, and I was catching my connecting flight, and boarded my flight, and were delayed in Dubai airport for 2 hours because there was a thunderstorm. I mean, it normally does not rain in Dubai, so they don't have drains because it doesn't rain. And yet 2 years ago, people in Dubai were driving in 2 feet of water because suddenly a huge thunderstorm had dumped water on the city, and they didn't have drains to take the water away. And so something is happening. Even the plants are confused. They don't know when to blossom to show that spring is here, because it's like the weather is playing tricks on them. It comes very warm, and then as soon as their flowers start coming out, it dumps snow on them. I mean, if you look at all this and you say, there's no climate change, I don't know what else, we can do with you. And so climate change is real. And all of us have worked together to reach the agreements we reached in Paris. And so we're all confused about what you guys are doing in America. Because America played a leading role in getting us the agreements that we got. And so when you turn around and you're signing, what do you call them? Executive orders every day, canceling things that we all work together to achieve, one wonders exactly where we're going. But the point is, you must realize that it affects your competitiveness too. Because the world is going in the direction of renewables and less dirty, energy. And so if you want to go back, you're going to be less competitive than Germany and all others. They're putting still plenty of money into research on cleaner energy that will contribute less to warming. Everybody is working on electric cars frantically, hoping to deliver within the next 10 years to the world cheaply. And so if you're changing rules for the auto industry and going back to more polluting vehicles, you're losing competitiveness. And so I guess that we need to look at what's happening here. America is the leader of the free world, but we're all now confused the direction in which you want to go. And so let's see how things happen. But Africa faces its challenges, and we'll see. We'll continue to work to see how we can resolve them. David asked me before we came into this hall. He said, "Oh, what do you think the, policy of the new administration will be to Africa?" And I said, well, we're still in the bubble. We've not been tweeted about yet, so I don't know what the policy with us is going to be. And so we have some time, to make sure that when that tweet comes, it's positive. And so, Mr. Trump, Africa is waiting to hear what you think about us. and I hope that tweet will be positive. We had the honor of hosting President Obama after he had been elected. Ghana was the first country he selected to visit because of our democratic credentials. And he spoke, I mean, everybody knows President Obama is an orator, but he spoke sincerely from his heart. And he said something that has reverberated with me all the while. He said, Africa does not need strong leaders. What Africa needs is strong institutions. And I believe that what he said is true. And that's what we must continue to work on, that the institutions of governments are strong and predictable so that we can fight corruption, so that we can provide the right services to our people. And so that was one of the quotes I took with me as president. And it's my hope that in other countries we'll continue to follow to strengthen the institutions. We need to open up the borders in Africa so that people, goods, and services can move freely across the continent. Trade amongst ourselves amounts to only 11%. And yet trade between Africa and the rest of the world constitutes 80% of our trade. And so we need to increase that. Trade in the North American free trade area is a significant 40%. In the EU, trade amongst the EU bloc is 60%. And so one, we need to integrate our economies more and allow people, goods, and services to move freely. One of the actions that I took that I stand proud of is that before I left office last year in July, I signed an executive order. We also sign executive orders in Africa, yeah? I signed an executive order that allows any African passport holder to travel freely into my country, Ghana, visa-free, and pick a visa at the airport. And it started operating on July 1st, and it's operated successfully. We've not seen any increase in bad hombres coming into Ghana. And so I think we must think again. I like something that was said on Farid Zakaria's program, GPS. He said that the glue that holds the world together is becoming undone. There's a certain sense of xenophobia sweeping across. We're trying to wall ourselves in and isolate ourselves. We worked for a long time to achieve a fair trade agreement in the world, and we want to undo it and introduce border taxes and all that. I wish to believe it's a passing fad and that it will blow over and we'll wake up to the fact that all of us were put on this planet together and none of us can live in isolation. You cannot build a wall around yourselves. I was president and chairman of the Economic Community of West African States when the Ebola outbreak occurred in West Africa. Ebola did not affect my country. There wasn't a single case we suffered in my country. And yet 3 cases occurred here in the United States. The infection jumped across the Atlantic into the United States. And so nobody is isolated from the rest of the world. And the more we work to ensure that things are better outside our country, the better it is for all of us. I gave Ghana as a staging post for the fight against Ebola. And a lot of my countrymen were upset. Why do you endanger our lives like that? And I said, if we don't get Ebola under control quickly enough, whatever we do, eventually it will arrive on our shores. And so Ghana was used as the staging post. The international response was quick and effective. President Obama released 5,000 American troops and paramedicals to join in the fight against Ebola. They built isolation centers, wards, and everything. And that's how come we're able to conquer in the fight against Ebola. And so we live together as a humanity, each his brother's keeper. And we must continue with that spirit. Africa will do its part of the heavy lifting, but it needs the support and encouragement of the rest of the world to be able to create a better life for the people of Africa. And so I thank you very much for your attention. I'll finish this off with a very short reading from my book, My First Coup d'etat, and other stories from the lost decades of Africa. It's a short excerpt, and when I was growing up, I used to live in the city with my father and attend school in the city. But every vacation, he whisked us off to spend some time with my mother, who lived in the countryside. And some of the period that I lived in the countryside were some of my most exciting and enjoyable periods, rather than living in the city. And so I'll just read a little from the chapter titled Wild Lions and Little Boys. And it goes like this. Poaching is a serious problem in Africa, one that will find many currently unprotected animals endangered, and many already endangered ones become extinct. Whereas once there were dozens of species of rhinoceros on the continent, now only 5 documented species remain. In the 1930s, there were 5 to 10 million African elephants in existence. By 1989, when they were placed on the endangered species list, there were just a little over 500,000 of them left. African lions are especially vulnerable because the poaching of one lion ultimately leads to the death of as many as 6 to 10 others. When the dominant male of a pride is killed, the male who then takes over as the dominant one will kill all of his predecessors' cubs. Currently, there are only about 10,000 to 15,000 free-roaming lions in Africa. A decade ago, that number was as high as 50,000. Deforestation is also a huge problem that is affecting the ability of animals to survive in their natural habitats. Only 10% of Ghana remains forested, and that figure is decreasing steadily at a rate of nearly 1.5% every year. In the days of my youth, there was only a laterite gravel road separating Damango, which is the town where my mother lived, from the Mole Game Reserve. This is a game park in the northern part of our country. There were no fences or gates or other contraptions to keep the animals in and the poachers out. But somehow the understanding of boundaries was fairly clear. When the animals violated the sanctity of that boundary, which was not very often, the consequence was death. When the poachers violated it, the consequence was imprisonment. It was even written into law. Animals found on the right side of the road were fair game, as it were, to be captured or killed by anyone who chose to do so. The instant a human crossed the road to the left side to do the killing, he officially became a poacher, and all poachers were arrested and put on trial. It is tempting for us as humans to believe that we are superior to all other creatures, and as such have the right to dominate them, if and when we so choose. Even as small boys, we believed this. We felt powerful, as though we were forced to be reckoned with, walking around with our little homemade catapults. We felt entitled to do as we wished in the narrow stretch of the village that we considered our kingdom. Then one day, during that same vacation, as we were hunting in our park, the tables turned on us, and we became the hunted. Just about a kilometer from the town is the Damango Scarp Forest Reserve, which is home to over 100 different species of birds. The scarp itself is a perpendicular rock face that rises up about 80 meters into a swooping plateau with a magically wavy outline upon which there is lush vegetation. We must have trudged through the forest and climbed the scarp a dozen times already during that vacation alone to go hunting in the shrubs and tussock grasses that covered the plateau. And this time felt no different from the others. Snake! Audu screamed. The thing I remember most about Audu is he had a massive nose. We used to teasingly call him Oxygen Catcher. As he screamed, I imagined his top lip rising sharply and then disappearing completely under the wide umbrella of his nose. We had encountered snakes before during our expeditions. Mostly they minded their own business, slithering quickly away from the thunder caused by our collective march. To them, our footsteps must have sounded like an approaching herd of elephants. But there was an urgency and fear in Audu's voice this time. I looked up just in time to see a massive reptile, about 2 meters long, with its scaly, coal black body coiled beneath it, lift its head high, and then flatten its neck as though it were preparing to strike. Ah, we screamed in unison. Some of us even dropped our catapults. The snake was no more than 10 meters away from us. We turned round in perfect formation, as though we were one single body instead of 10 boys. But then after that, when we started sprinting away, it was everybody for himself and the snake for us all. I have never run that fast in my life. It was a primal flight, as though my body were hurtling forward on its own volition. I could feel my heart pounding in my mouth, as if it were literally going to burst. The fear was palpable, like a living, breathing thing, encasing my body tighter and tighter as I progressed. As I ran through the shrubs and tussock grass, each time my leg grazed a blade or branch or leaf, it would make a rustling sound that I imagined to be the snake gaining ground on me and coming closer to its victory. It was when we arrived home, Alfred and I, Alfred was my elder brother, still running and gasping and sneaking glances behind us to see if the snake was still there, that our mother told us about the man who had been mauled the night before by a lion. She ordered us not to venture too far, or better yet, just to stay within the town, at least until the lion had been captured. After the harrowing experience we just had with the snake, we were extremely happy to oblige her.
Okay, we're going to begin Q&A now. So if you want to ask a question, there's a microphone in the center aisle. As usual, we ask that the first 3 questions be from students. So don't be shy. And then the way that we're going to do this, we're going to take a bundle of about 5 questions each time. And then once you ask your question, you're going to go back to your seat. And then Mr. Mahama will begin answering them. Okay.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask about Chinese and Ghanaian relations.
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of investment by China in West Africa, especially in Angola, where like, a few years ago, there was an 11% increase in economic growth. And so just to what extent can Ghanaian-Chinese relations and Chinese investment within Ghana speak to the economic growth within Ghana, and what is the future of Chinese and Ghanaian relations?
Okay. Thank you.
So my question is also related to China. And you talk about democracy dividend in some African countries, and you show your respect for democracy. I just checked on your tweet. You said that people come, people serve, and people go. That's what democracy is and what democracy should be.
Yes.
But institution does not just mean democracy. It also includes state capacity building and the rule of law. And people talk about Beijing model and Washington model are vying in the land of Africa. So what do you think of these 3 institutions should play out? Or more specifically, in what sequence should these 3 institutions take place in most African countries?
Hello, President Mahama. I have a question about economic development and foreign direct investments, because you talk about Africa has been growing very high over the past couple of years. In the future, which industry do you think in Africa has the highest growth potential, let's say in the next 10 years? And how do you see the effect of foreign direct investments role in Africa's development?
Okay.
Thanks.
So on a related note, I think we talk a lot, especially in America, about investment in Africa, and we think of it, the continent as a single unit. And some of your talk today has also thought about this theme of Africa as a single unit. As we think about empowering investment as opposed to sort of self-serving investment across the continent, are there ways that we should be thinking about individual countries, individual regions in sort of a different manner?
Okay.
Hello, thank you for speaking today. So in your book, you give acknowledgments to your father as a role model for you. And for me, my father was also a big model for what I do and what I believe in. And for him is his mother. And so one of the things that I would like to hear from you about is what kind of policies you have in place for parents in general. You talked about different social protection programs you had for children. but then I want to know what Ghana is doing for the parents as
Okay.
models.
Okay. Thank you. I think 1, 2, 3. These are 5 questions. I'll take them and then I'll come back to you. China, and I'll talk not only of Ghana, but Africa, because I think it's the same across the whole of the continent. In the last China-Africa conference we held in South Africa, in Joburg, China pledged another $60 billion for African development. Some of the most critical infrastructure is being built with Chinese money. If you go to East Africa, a lot of the railways that are being put in, a lot of the highways, a lot of the electricity transmission grids are being put in by China. And it is helpful because it puts Africa in a position where it can attract the kind of investment that is necessary. To attract investment, both foreign and domestic investment, you need a certain level of infrastructure. You need roads to evacuate products if you put in a factory. You need ports that can ship those products out. If you have raw materials, you need to be able to bring them in. And so in that sense, I do believe that China's role is helpful. If you go to my country, Ghana, several of the highways that today link major cities and enable us to bring out agricultural products from the hinterland to the market have been built with Chinese financing. Today we have a gas processing plant that enables us to take raw gas from our offshore gas reserves, bring it onshore, process it, and supply it to our thermal electricity plants in order that we can generate enough electricity for Ghana's economic growth. That processing plant was built with a loan from China. And so I'll say that in terms of infrastructure development, yes, I think that there's something positive in what China is doing. And so if you look at that, and then you look vis-a-vis, some of the attitudes we see developing, especially in the West, where people want to cut, that kind of funding, then you don't know what vacuum is being created, into which somebody is stepping. Like I said, we all live as one global village, and we're all the same humanity. And so that ODA that is given to the State Department, which is helpful to Ghanaian farmers, USAID is doing a lot in terms of modernizing our agriculture, providing our farmers with improved seeds so that they can increase their incomes. And so they might not be doing the huge infrastructural projects, but I must say that the kind of work that USAID and others are doing in order to provide better quality health care for our people is also phenomenal. And so countries like China are expanding that assistance, especially in big infrastructural projects. And I don't think it's time to be cutting the State Department's $54 billion budget, that is doing, very critical things for humanity in other parts of the world. But there are also downsides. I won't say it's all rosy. I had a bit of a problem when I was in office because we had an influx of Chinese migrants who came into our country. There was like a gold rush, an El Dorado, and many people came and were involved in illegal gold mining. And I don't say that there was not illegal mining before, but it was done by indigenous people using primitive implements, shovels and wheelbarrows and pickaxes. But then when the influx came from China, they came with heavy earth-moving machines, excavators and bulldozers. And in a short while, the kind of damage those machines were doing was phenomenal. And so we had no option but to, deport several people who were not legally resident anyway. And I think that caused a bit of, unpleasantness between us. But I did it in our national interest. It was something I had to do. And, but I do believe that our diplomatic relations are still very good, and we continue to engage with China. I know in some places some of that friction exists. For instance, if you take Zambia, in Zambia, there's concern about, dominance of retail trade and other places by Chinese migrants. And you take some other countries, DRC, there too, you take the copper mines, you take all the mines, there are several people there, creating destruction to the environment. I wouldn't say they're only Chinese, but I mean, there are some other Asian nationals. And so that's the situation. I think that when I talk about democracy, I don't talk about it as something that should be imposed. I believe that democracy evolves, and when you become a crusader and trying to impose democracy, then sometimes you get the kind of results that we're seeing in Iraq and Libya and all those places. I believe that people must become empowered themselves to continue to expand their democratic space. And that is what happened in Ghana. In Ghana, we ourselves continue to fight to expand our democratic space until we've created a kind of democracy that suits us. But if we go around crusading and forcing people to accept democratic institutions, it won't work. And sometimes it can backfire quite badly. I've spoken to several of my friends who were very close friends to me when Gaddafi was in office. And they tell me that, it was much better under Gaddafi, and that if they had to wind the clock back. I think that the Libyans themselves should have been allowed to expand their space without the interference of the UK and France and all that. And eventually, they would have demanded more space to be able to speak their minds and be able to participate in their democracy. But like I said, institutions must be predictable, they must be strong, they must be equitable, they must not be discriminatory. I think that those are the ideals we must continue to work for. There are countries where you have a leader who has no term limits, but he's doing the things that make life decent and comfortable for his people. He might restrict freedom of speech, but it's for the people to continue to push the limits and expand that space to be able to speak freely. I don't think that anybody should go and dictate to them how they should exercise their democracy. I got a question from Harvard when I spoke at Harvard, and somebody asked me, he says, "So look, you've spoken so brilliantly about democratic consolidation. Why don't you go and tell my president, President Mugabe, that he should get out of the way?" And I said, it's not for me, it's for you Zimbabweans to fight to expand your democratic space and make sure that you get the kind of leader you want. And so yes, Ghana will continue to be a beacon showing what is possible. And I believe that in being that example, we will encourage other African countries to fight to establish the same democracy we have in Ghana. After I handed over, after losing the election, even before I handed over, when the campaign was still going on, several people came up to me and said, "What if you lose?" I said, "Well, if I lose, what's wrong?" He says, "Will you hand over?" I said, "Yes, of course. If you lose an election, what must you do? You must hand over to whoever has won it." And so it should become the norm. I mean, leaders should not be celebrated for handing over and ensuring a peaceful transition. That is what it must be. And I believe that that is what increasingly it will continue to be in Africa. Let me go quickly. In terms of investment, what industries have the potential, to make Africa economically prosperous? I believe that Africa has a comparative advantage when it comes to agriculture and agribusiness, and we should be able to leverage investment into that sector. Of course, we should also start looking at taking up the slack of some of the other manufacturing in light goods and other things that China is beginning to give up. China is looking for more high-value jobs now, and so they're moving some of, the textile plants and a lot of those plants into Vietnam and other, Southeast Asian countries. Africa must be able to attract some of that, manufacturing into Africa so that we can find jobs for the increasingly youthful population. We're beginning to have a youth bulge, and we must throw up as many jobs as possible so that we don't have idle youth who become fair recruiting grounds for terrorists and other groups like that. And so that's what I believe we should do. How do you deal? There are other industries like telecommunications. And let me say that telecommunications has been driven largely by Africans in the diaspora coming back home, learning the new technology in America, and coming back home with that technology. And so when you go to Ghana and other African countries, you find that some of the data, companies dealing in data transmission and others are set up by Africans who formerly lived in the United States and other places coming back and bringing that technology home. And so today, if you see telecommunications and ICT exploding across Africa and growing at the fastest pace in Africa than the rest of the world, then a lot of it is generated by many of our relatives who've come back from the diaspora with the new technology to come and set up, these investments. And so that's one area that is going well. Regional integration is very important. I believe that for every investor, if you want to invest in manufacturing especially, or any good production of any goods and services, you prefer to have a market of 350 million people than to have a market of 27 million. Ghana is 27 million people. Nigeria is 150. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana is 27, Cote d'Ivoire is 23 million or 24 million. But then if you put the whole of West Africa together, it's 350 million people. And so if you had a market that size and you could move goods and services freely across the borders, I think it would be a win-win for everybody. I gave the example just in a class of yours at the Harris School of Public Policy, that we have an investor like Dangote in Nigeria. He's one of the wealthiest black people with huge investments, especially in cement production. And if he had access to the whole 350 million West African market, he could produce and move cement from Nigeria to all these segments of the market. But unfortunately, because of the difficulty of moving goods across West Africa, it has compelled him to set up supplementary cement plants in other countries. And so he has to invest twice, thrice, 4 times what he would have invested in subsidiary plants than if he could move those goods freely from Nigeria. And so that's one example of the hindrance that it causes and the negative restraints it puts on the growing economy of West Africa. So regional integration is a must, and we must continue to follow it. What policy do we have for parents? I think that the family is the basic unit of any country, and you ignore the family at your own peril. And so programs that allow parents to be able to take some of the burden of education and health off them, are positive things. And like I said, Ghana has one of the best national health insurance schemes. Several other African countries have come to look at our model and copy it. And I wouldn't mind if your Congress could send a team to Ghana and see how we did ours. But it's allowed us to take some of the burden off parents and be able to give affordable quality health care to them. One of the major principal focuses we need to have is on women's empowerment. Because if you empower women, their contribution to economic activity alone results in a significant jump in the economic growth numbers. And aside from that, we have more girls going to school. And all the studies have shown that when women go to school and they qualify from school, they are able to look after their children properly. And so the children don't have a high mortality rate. And so they have fewer children. They have 1, 2, 3 children they can look after. They know those children are not going to die under 5 or whatever because they're educated. They know they must send them for their vaccinations. But when a woman hasn't gone to school, she doesn't send the children for vaccinations. And so it's like a lottery. She has 7 children or 10 children, and 3 or 4 will die, and she'll still have 6 or 5 left. That is the reality. And so just educating women and empowering them Because when you empower them and they make money, they use that money to look after the family and the children. If men are empowered and they have some money, well, some looks after the family, a little goes into drinking some beer with friends, at the weekend and, having a nice time sometimes. And so working on empowering women and making sure they're educated is one critical thing we need to continue to focus on and work on. And happily, in Ghana, we're making good progress with women's empowerment. Thank you.
And then this is going to be our final batch of questions.
Thank you so much for being here. I just had a couple quick questions about your take on the current refugee crisis in Western Sahara and the ongoing conflict between the Polisario Front and the Moroccan government. In brief, what do you think the best way forward is for the region?
Hi, thank you for coming here to speak. I was wondering, earlier you said that the African population is rapidly increasing. And I was wondering how that would affect specifically Ghana's healthcare system and also public health in general in Ghana. And additionally, I was wondering how a person in your position of being a former president could influence a positive change toward adapting to these changes. Thank you.
Okay.
Your Excellency, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you about the doctrine of responsibility to protect, which was pioneered by your countryman, Kofi Annan, and more broadly about when you're dealing with actual countries that are currently in conflict, of which there are a few in Africa, to what extent real interventionist policies are justified or appropriate. So if you take the example of South Sudan, often you have sort of Western countries wanting to take a more interventionist approach with sanctions and troops sometimes, but then often on the other side, often African leaders are resisting that. In the UN, for example, and the common refrain is African solutions for African problems. So I want to know sort of where you fell on that spectrum and what you think about that debate. Thank you.
Your Excellency, I'm not a student. I'm originally from Ghana.
Okay.
And I am the NAR President's Liaison to Ghana, National Association of Realtor President's Liaison to Ghana. I have two questions. My first question is regarding what kind of partnerships do you see Ghana and the rest of Africa having with the diasporans, because there's a lot of resources amongst the diasporans living outside Ghana, especially in the United States. And I think the country should, take a lot of these resources, tap into the resources. My second question is regarding the last person said regarding the population growth in Africa and in Ghana. Where do you see real estate in terms of real estate, the population growth versus real estate growth in Africa? I think it's very important that we look at these two things at the same time. And I'm saying this because of the hat that I wear as the National Association of Realtors President's Liaison. I'm very concerned about the real estate in Africa.
Okay. Last but not the least.
So as you mentioned, Ghana has been at the vanguard of many things in Africa. One area it hasn't has been mobile money. It's taken off in East Africa and it's finally worked its way west. Why do you think that is, and what lessons do you draw from that for other nascent industries and technologies?
All right, thank you very much. Let me just finish this batch quickly. Western Sahara continues to be a running sore in Africa's reputation. The conflict has lasted too long, and it looks like there's no resolution in sight. The United Nations has been involved in trying to resolve it. And the solution that the UN came up with was to have a referendum for the people of Western Sahara to decide whether they wanted to be a part of Morocco or they wanted to be an independent nation. Unfortunately, that referendum has not taken place, and the whole process has gotten stuck in the corridors of the United Nations. I think that it's something that we must advocate to have happen so that a final determination is given to this once and for all. Of course, there are powerful forces involved. I think that Western Sahara has become a proxy battle between Algeria and Morocco. Algeria gives support to the Polisario Front, which is fighting for independence of Western Sahara. And of course, Morocco wants Western Sahara claims that Western Sahara was always a part of their kingdom and wants Western Sahara to be part of Morocco. And so it's a bit intractable, but I guess that with determination, we should be able to resolve it. It can't continue forever. We must do something about it. And so we can urge the UN to move forward and hold that referendum, and let's have a final determination to this issue. Increasing population, what effect does it have on public health? It does have an effect on public health. As president, I had to put in more health facilities to be able to cater for just the growing population. We had expanded the number of districts, political districts we have, based on the increase in population. And then you find that some new districts you've created do not have a district hospital. And so people have to travel long distances to be able to access healthcare. And we had created an affordable solution for healthcare and to improve access, which was a national health insurance scheme. And people had to pay a premium. But if you paid a premium, and to be able to access healthcare, you had to pay transport to travel, say, 30 kilometers to access healthcare and come back. Then it renders useless the affordable healthcare that we have provided. And so then it means that you must follow the people with the health facilities and increase the number of health facilities, so that our aim was that nobody should travel more than 5 kilometers to be able to access healthcare. And that is the policy we've been pursuing. So we built district hospitals, we built new regional hospitals, and we came out with a novelty called the CHIPS compounds. These are quality health improvement compounds. And each of them is manned by a health worker, at least with the qualification of a nurse. And so you could go there and get treatment for malaria, you could go there and get treatment for simple infectious diseases. And if it was something more serious, then we had a system of using mobile phones to call the National Ambulance Service to come and evacuate the patient to a larger facility where they could get care. And so population growth impacts public health. It means that you must put more investment in public health, which you could have put in other sectors of the economy. Conflict, like South Sudan, and interventions. Like I said, I believe that all people want is a stable environment to be able to go about their normal way of life and be able to look after their families. That's all they want. And so the leaders have a certain responsibility to ensure that there's peace and stability. Unfortunately, South Sudan emerged, after the referendum as an independent sovereign state. And it had all the good wishes of the world. It had beautiful prospects. It's got oil and gas, and unfortunately, just a difference between the president and the vice president escalated into ethnic conflict, because the vice president comes from a different ethnic group and the president comes from a different ethnic group. And normally when conflict takes ethnic lines, run along ethnic faults, then they're more difficult to resolve. And so you cannot just go in and shoot people and resolve the conflict. You need to go beyond just strong intervention. You need to create a reconciliation between the ethnic groups and get them to accepting to live and work together again. And so even after the issue is resolved with the leadership, we must create a reconciliation that makes the two people willing to live together again. And so, yes, it's taking some time, but I believe we must put more urgency into it. The East African leaders were given the responsibility to do the mediation, and they've been doing it for a while. They reach stages where they're supposed to sign the peace agreements and things, and then some new complication comes up. But all of us as African leaders must put our shoulders to the wheel and see how we can resolve these conflicts so that our people can be able to build a life of decency and dignity for themselves. Partnership with the diaspora, we're doing that already. It's happening. Like I told you, a lot of diasporans are coming back and investing. And especially for the last question, last but one question, the lady who asked about real estate. A lot of the real estate in Ghana, and I presume in many other African countries, is being built by people living in the diaspora. And so even though we have Ghanaians and Nigerians and other people living here, they believe that eventually I might have to go home, and so I need to have a place where I can lay my head. And so a lot of them are building, properties and either renting them out or, having their families live in while they continue to work. But for countries like Ghana, what we've done is we have asked that a diaspora desk be established in all our missions abroad. And that diaspora desk should maintain a contact with our citizens in the diaspora and see how we are able to facilitate their return if they do so wish to come back home. And aside from that, making it possible for them to travel freely is also important. We passed the dual citizenship law. Before in Ghana, if you were of Ghanaian origin and you moved to another country and you acquired the passport of the other country, automatically your Ghanaian citizenship was cancelled and you couldn't hold a Ghanaian passport. But now we allow it, and so you can hold citizenship of one country but still maintain your original Ghanaian citizenship. And that means that you can travel back to Ghana without applying for a visa or something like that. And so all those are, efforts to keep in touch with the diaspora and attract them to come back and invest. Finally, mobile money. It's very regrettable. Indeed, I feel a sense of shame because Ghana was on the cutting edge of the telecom revolution. Ghana and South Africa were the first to begin the deregulation of our telecom sectors. And mobile telephony, internet, Ghana was among the leaders, the pioneers. But then when it came to, the issue of mobile money, East Africa has done much better and taking a lead. But I can assure you we're catching up. Growth in mobile money is increasing phenomenally, and people are using the service more. And we're looking to even leapfrog using NFC notification to just pay directly out of your mobile phone instead of going to mobile agents, mobile money agents and all that. And so I assure you, things are being put in place to catch up. And Ghana will catch up and overtake those who took an early lead. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, if this mic is on.
You can use this.
Yes. I don't want to take your mic. I wanted to thank you for your wisdom and your insights, and I will say, I don't know what happened in your election, but if you took the vote in this room, you'd get a healthy majority. So, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.